6 women, 6 very different fates. One man changed the course of history and destroyed lives in his obsession with a single goal, a male heir. This is the story of Henry VIII, the king who broke from the Catholic Church, tore England apart, and left a trail of blood and broken hearts in his wake. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a charismatic Renaissance prince transformed into one of history's most notorious tyrants, and how the woman he valued least became his greatest legacy. To understand why Henry VIII became obsessed with marriage, divorce, and execution, we need to go back to where it all started. Because Henry VIII was never supposed to be king. Born in 1491, Henry was the spare, not the heir. His older brother Arthur was groomed for the throne from birth, tutored in statecraft, betrothed to a Spanish princess named Catherine of Aragon to secure a powerful alliance. Young Henry? He was destined for the church, or perhaps a minor role in his brother's court. But in 1502, everything changed. Arthur died suddenly at just 15 years old, possibly from the sweating sickness that plagued Tudor England. Overnight, 10-year-old Henry went from afterthought to the future of the Tudor dynasty. When Henry took the throne in 1509, at 17 years old, England rejoiced. Here was everything a Renaissance king should be: tall, athletic, an accomplished musician and poet, fluent in multiple languages. He jousted, he hunted, he dazzled at court. One observer wrote that, "His Majesty is the handsomest potentate I ever set eyes on." But the shadow of his father's paranoid, penny-pinching reign hung over him. Henry VII had won the crown on the battlefield at Bosworth Field, ending the Wars of the Roses. But the Tudor claim to the throne was shaky, challenged by Yorkist pretenders. Henry VII's response had been to hoard wealth and eliminate rivals ruthlessly. Henry VIII wanted to be different. He wanted glory, not just survival. He wanted to be remembered as a great king, a warrior king, a king whose dynasty would last forever. And for that, he needed sons, lots of them. It was this need, this obsession, that would lead him to marry 6 times, break with 1,000 years of Catholic tradition, and send 2 of his wives to the executioner's block. Our story truly begins with the first of those 6 wives, the woman who was married to Henry longer than all the others combined. The first wife, the one who lasted longest, the one Henry loved, until he didn't. Born a Spanish princess in 1485, Catherine was a near-perfect Renaissance queen, educated, pious, dignified, and politically connected. She was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the power couple who had united Spain and funded Columbus's voyage to the New World. But Catherine's story with England began with tragedy. At 15, she was moved to England to marry Prince Arthur, Henry's older brother, in a grand political alliance. But, as we know, 5 months later, Arthur was dead. Catherine became stranded in a foreign country, her future uncertain. For 7 years she lived in limbo, too valuable to send home, but with no clear role. She was kept in near poverty, while Henry VII and Ferdinand haggled over her dowry and her fate. Then Henry VII died, and suddenly 17-year-old Henry VIII was king. One of his first acts was marrying his brother's widow. It seemed romantic, a young king rescuing a princess in distress. But there was also cold political calculation. The Spanish alliance was valuable, and marrying Catherine meant Henry didn't have to return her dowry. There was just one problem. Church law forbade a man from marrying his brother's widow. It was considered incest, based on a verse in the book of Leviticus. But Henry VII had secured a papal dispensation, special permission from the Pope, based on Catherine's sworn testimony that her marriage to Arthur had never been consummated. She was, she insisted, still a virgin. For the first 15 years, the marriage was genuinely happy. Catherine was intelligent, politically astute, and a capable regent. When Henry went to war in France in 1513, he left her in charge of England. And when Scotland invaded while he was gone, Catherine's forces crushed them at the Battle of Flodden, killing the Scottish king. She sent Henry the bloodied coat of James IV as a trophy. But there was one crucial failure: sons. Catherine became pregnant at least 6 times. She had miscarriages, stillbirths, sons who lived only days or weeks. The only child who survived was a daughter, born in 1516, Mary. In that era, a daughter wasn't good enough. England had never successfully been ruled by a queen. The memory of civil war, the Wars of the Roses that had nearly destroyed England, was still fresh. Without a male heir, everything Henry's father had built could collapse into chaos. By the early 1520s, Catherine was in her late 30s, past childbearing age by Tudor standards, and Henry's eye had begun to wander. Her name was Anne Boleyn. Anne was magnetic, sophisticated, educated in the French court, witty, but crucially, she refused to become Henry's mistress. Henry had had mistresses before, but Anne wanted marriage, and Henry became obsessed. By 1527, Henry had convinced himself that his marriage to Catherine was cursed by God. That verse in Leviticus, "If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing, they shall be childless." Surely this explained everything. Never mind that he had a daughter. In Henry's mind, daughters didn't count. He called it his great matter. He needed the Pope to annul his marriage, to declare it had never been valid. But there was a massive problem. The Pope was essentially a prisoner of Catherine's nephew, Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor who had just sacked Rome. The Pope couldn't possibly annul the marriage of Charles's aunt without enraging the most powerful man in Europe. For 6 years, the case dragged on. Catherine fought back with dignity and determination. When called before the court at Blackfriars in 1529, she knelt before Henry and delivered one of the most powerful speeches in Tudor history, insisting her marriage to Arthur had never been consummated, that her marriage to Henry was valid, and appealing her case to Rome. Henry wouldn't even look at her, but Catherine's resistance only made Henry more determined and more radical. If the Pope wouldn't give him what he wanted, he'd break with Rome entirely. In 1533, Henry married Anne Boleyn in secret, while still technically married to Catherine. Then, he appointed a new Archbishop of Canterbury who declared his marriage to Catherine invalid. England broke from the Catholic Church. Henry declared himself supreme head of the Church of England. Catherine was stripped of her title. She was no longer queen, just the Dowager Princess of Wales, Arthur's widow. She was separated from her daughter Mary and sent away to increasingly isolated, uncomfortable castles. She never saw Henry or Mary again. For 3 years, Catherine lived in exile in her own adopted country, refused to acknowledge the annulment, and continued to sign her letters, Catherine the Queen. She died in January 1536, possibly of cancer, possibly of a broken heart. She was 50 years old. Her last letter was to Henry, and it ended, "Lastly, I make this vow, that mine eyes desire you above all things." When Henry heard of her death, he dressed in yellow, the color of joy in some contexts, mourning in others, and celebrated. Some said it was relief, some said it was guilt disguised as triumph. Catherine of Aragon had been Queen of England for 24 years. She had been loyal, capable, and dignified. Her reward was humiliation, exile, and separation from her only child. But there was an irony to this. Her daughter Mary would eventually become queen, ruling for 5 years, albeit earning the nickname Bloody Mary. And Mary never forgot what Henry had done to her mother. Catherine was gone. Anne Boleyn was queen, and Henry's nightmare was just beginning. Anne Boleyn, the woman who changed England forever. Born around 1501, the exact date is uncertain, Anne was the daughter of an ambitious courtier, Thomas Boleyn, who sent her to the Netherlands and then France to be educated at the most sophisticated courts in Europe. When she returned to England in 1522, she was unlike anyone Henry had ever met. While other English ladies were demure and traditional, Anne was sharp-witted, fashionable in the French style, and utterly self-possessed. For 7 years, Henry had pursued her. 7 years of love letters, gifts, promises. Anne held firm, watching as Henry dismantled his marriage to Catherine, defied the Pope, and tore England away from Rome, all to make her his wife. By the time they had married secretly in 1533, Anne was already pregnant. Everything Henry had sacrificed until now was betting on one outcome, that Anne would give him a son. On September 7th, 1533, Anne gave birth to a daughter. Henry tried to hide his disappointment, but Anne knew. She'd seen what happened to Catherine, and now she had to get pregnant again, immediately, or face the same fate. The next few years were a nightmare of miscarriages. Anne became pregnant again in 1534, but miscarried. Then again. The pressure was unbearable. Her behavior became erratic. She was sharp-tongued, jealous, volatile. Some historians think she was simply terrified. Others suggest she was always headstrong, and Henry had just stopped finding it charming. On the same day Catherine was buried in 1536, Anne miscarried once again, a boy. And this time, Henry had had enough. Some sources claim Henry burst into her chamber and shouted that he saw clearly God would not give him male children with her. Whether that's true or not, something shifted. Henry began to believe that his marriage to Anne was as cursed as his marriage to Catherine had been. But unlike Catherine, there was no biblical excuse. Anne would have to be removed another way. Henry's chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, began building a case. It was monstrous. Anne was accused of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother George. She was accused of plotting the king's death. The charges were almost certainly false. The timeline of the alleged affairs was physically impossible. But truth didn't matter. Henry wanted rid of her. Anne was arrested later that year and taken to the Tower of London, the same place where she'd stayed in luxury before her coronation just 3 years earlier. Now she was a prisoner, accused of treason. The 5 men accused with her were tried and executed first. Then Anne herself was tried before a court of peers, including her own uncle, who presided over the proceedings. The verdict was decided before the trial began: guilty. Anne was sentenced to be burned at the stake or beheaded at the king's pleasure. Henry, in a gesture some call mercy and others call vanity, brought in an expert swordsman from France instead of using an axe. It would be quicker, cleaner. On May 19th, 1536, Anne was led to a scaffold on Tower Green. She wore a grey damask gown with an ermine mantle and a white coif. She prepared a speech. It was careful, diplomatic. Not quite a confession, but not quite a denial. She praised the king and asked people to pray for her. Her last reported words were a prayer asking God to have mercy on her soul. The swordsman struck. Anne Boleyn was dead at around 35 years old. Her body was placed in an arrow chest. There wasn't even a proper coffin, and buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula in the Tower. Anne's daughter Elizabeth was declared illegitimate, just as Mary had been. At 2 years old, Elizabeth had lost her mother and her status in one blow. No one could have predicted that this rejected, illegitimate daughter would become Elizabeth I, one of England's greats. Anne Boleyn's legacy is complicated. She was ambitious, clever, and brave enough to demand marriage when others would have settled for less. She changed the course of English history. The break from Rome, the seeds of the English Reformation, all came about because of Henry's obsession with her. But in the end, like Catherine before her, she discovered a terrible truth. When you were Henry VIII's wife, your value began and ended with your ability to produce sons. Henry's fortune all changed with his next wife, but as you might come to expect, it wasn't that simple. Jane Seymour, the quiet one. If Anne Boleyn was fire, Jane Seymour was water. Pale, demure, soft-spoken, she was everything Anne was not, and that was exactly the point. Born around 1508, Jane came from respectable but not particularly distinguished gentry. She'd served as lady-in-waiting to both Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, watching from the sidelines as both queens rose and fell. Jane learned from their mistakes. When Henry's eye turned to her in 1535, she played it perfectly. She was modest, submissive, virtuous. When Henry sent her a letter and a purse of gold, she returned them both, kissing the letter but refusing to open it, saying she was a gentlewoman of good and honourable family, who valued her honour above all. Henry, exhausted by Anne's volatile temperament, found it irresistible. The day after Anne Boleyn's execution, Henry was betrothed to Jane. 11 days later, on May 30th, 1536, they were married. There was no elaborate coronation for Jane. Henry couldn't afford to look too eager, and besides, she'd have to prove herself first. Prove herself by giving him a son. For over a year, nothing happened, no pregnancy. Henry began to grow anxious. 2 wives, 1 daughter each, and still no male heir. Was he cursed? Would he have to go through this nightmare again? Then, in early 1537, Jane became pregnant. This time, Henry was cautious. He'd been disappointed too many times. But as the pregnancy progressed without incident, hope began to build. Prayers were said across England. Everything was prepared for the birth of the prince. On October 12, 1537, after a difficult labour lasting 2 days and 3 nights, Jane gave birth to a son, Edward. Henry finally had his male heir. The prince he'd torn England apart to conceive. The son he defied the Pope, broken with Rome, destroyed 2 marriages, and executed a wife to obtain. The celebrations were extraordinary. Bonfires blazed across London. Bells rang from every church. Henry wept with joy. After 28 years of marriage across 3 wives, he finally had a legitimate son. But Jane never recovered. She developed childbed fever, likely a postpartum infection. For 12 days she lingered, drifting in and out of consciousness. The doctors were helpless. On October 24th, 1537, just 12 days after giving birth to the future Edward VI, Jane Seymour died. She was about 29 years old. Henry was devastated. Of all his wives, Jane was the one he genuinely mourned. He wore black for months. He had her buried with full honours at Windsor Castle, and years later, when he died, he would be buried beside her. Why Jane? Some say it was because she gave him Edward. Others suggest it was because she died before Henry could grow tired of her, before she could disappoint him, before reality could tarnish the image. She remained perfect because she remained frozen in time, the wife who gave him everything and asked for nothing in return. Jane's son Edward would become King Edward VI, but he was sickly from birth. He would reign for only 6 years before dying at 15. The male heir Henry had sacrificed everything to produce, dying young and childless, making all of it meaningless. But that was years away. In 1537, Henry had his son, and after a period of mourning, he'd be looking for wife number 4. This time, it wouldn't be about love or passion. It would be about politics, and it would be a disaster. After Jane's death in 1537, Henry was alone again. He was 46 years old, overweight, with an ulcerated leg that caused him constant pain. The Golden Prince of 1509 was long gone, but he was still king, and England needed alliances. His chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, had a plan, a marriage alliance with the Protestant princes of Germany. The Duchy of Cleves was perfectly positioned, not too powerful to threaten England, but connected enough to matter. And they had an available princess, Anne. The problem was that Henry had never seen her. In the 16th century, you couldn't just video call your potential bride. So Henry did what royal families did. He sent the court painter, Hans Holbein, to paint her portrait. Holbein's portrait showed a serene, dignified woman in elaborate German dress. Henry looked at it and approved the match. Negotiations began, a treaty was signed. Anne set sail for England in late 1539. She arrived on New Year's Day, 1540. Henry, ever the romantic, decided to surprise her. He'd read too many chivalric romances where the king disguises himself to test his bride's true feelings. So he dressed as a messenger and burst into her chamber while she was watching bear baiting from her window. It went catastrophically wrong. Anne didn't recognize him. Why would she? She'd never seen him. She was startled and confused by this large, foul-smelling stranger. Henry was humiliated. He stormed out, returned in his royal clothes, and tried again. But the magic was broken. That night, Henry complained bitterly to Cromwell. He called Anne a Flanders mare. He said she was nothing like her portrait, that she was plain, that she smelled bad, that he found her completely unattractive. But the treaty was signed. The diplomatic wheels were in motion. Henry felt trapped. The wedding went ahead on January 6, 1540. It was Henry's fourth marriage in less than 4 years. But there was an immediate problem. Henry wouldn't consummate the marriage. He claimed he had no desire for her. His gentlemen of the bedchamber were questioned about the intimate details. It was humiliating for everyone involved. For 6 months, the unconsummated marriage limped along. Henry desperately searched for a way out. Then he found one. If the marriage was never consummated, it could be annulled on the grounds of non-consent. Anne, he claimed, had been pre-contracted to another man anyway. Her previous betrothal had never been properly dissolved. In July 1540, Henry summoned Anne and asked her to agree to an annulment. And here's where Anne showed her intelligence. She said yes. No drama, no fighting, no claiming her rights as queen. Anne of Cleves looked at what had happened to Catherine and Anne Boleyn and made the smartest decision of her life. She let him go. In exchange for her cooperation, Henry was extraordinarily generous. He gave her a massive settlement, castles, manors, a huge income. He called her his beloved sister. She was given precedence at court over every woman except the king's wife and daughters. She kept her status, her wealth, and most importantly, her head. Anne lived comfortably in England for the rest of her life. She attended court functions. She maintained friendly relations with Henry and later with his children. She outlived him by 10 years. Of all Henry's wives, she had perhaps the happiest ending, wealthy, independent, and alive. The marriage had lasted just 6 months. No one was hurt, but Thomas Cromwell wasn't so lucky. Henry blamed him for the disastrous match. Within weeks of the annulment, Cromwell was arrested, attainted for treason, and executed. The man who had engineered Henry's break from Rome and the dissolution of the monasteries was beheaded on July 28, 1540. On the very same day Cromwell died, Henry married again, wife number 5. And this time, he truly believed he'd found love. Catherine Howard, the rose without a thorn. Where Anne of Cleves had been too old and plain for Henry's tastes, Catherine Howard was the opposite. She was young, probably 17 or 18 when Henry noticed her. She was pretty, vivacious, and full of life. And Henry, now nearly 50, fat, diseased, and in constant pain, was utterly besotted. Catherine was Anne Boleyn's first cousin, another Howard girl sent to court to catch the king's eye. But unlike Anne, Catherine had no political sophistication, no cunning, no understanding of the deadly game she was playing. She'd grown up neglected in the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. It was a chaotic environment where young women had minimal supervision. Catherine had already had at least 2 romantic entanglements before Henry ever noticed her. A music teacher named Henry Mannix and a young man named Francis Derham, who called her his wife. But in 1540, when the aging king's attention fell on her, Catherine's family saw an opportunity. They pushed her forward, and Catherine, young and probably flattered, didn't resist. Henry married her on July 28, 1540. Where his marriage to Anne of Cleves had been a political calculation gone wrong, his marriage to Catherine was pure infatuation. He called her his rose without a thorn, his jewel of womanhood. He showered her with gifts, lands, and jewelry. For a brief moment, Catherine made Henry feel young again. He dressed in bright colours, he threw feasts and danced. The old man was in love. But Catherine was essentially a child married to a diseased, temperamental tyrant, old enough to be her grandfather. While Henry was infatuated, Catherine was trapped. Within months of the marriage, Catherine began an affair with Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the king's privy chamber. Whether it was love, recklessness, or desperation is debated. Catherine's past also came back to haunt her. Francis Derham, her former lover, appeared at court and was given a position in her household. Whether Catherine invited him or whether he forced his way in through blackmail isn't clear. But the situation was explosive. In November 1541, everything fell apart. While Henry was at prayer, Archbishop Cranmer handed him a letter detailing Catherine's past relationships and current affair. At first, Henry didn't believe it. His rose without a thorn couldn't have betrayed him, but the investigation began. Servants were questioned. Torture was threatened. The stories came out. The midnight meetings, the love letters, the gifts exchanged between Catherine and Culpeper. Henry was devastated. He wept in front of his council, not with grief, but with rage and humiliation. Once again, he'd been made a fool. Once again, a wife had betrayed him. Catherine was arrested and confined to Sion House. She was never formally charged or tried. Parliament simply passed a bill of attainder declaring her guilty. Francis Derham and Thomas Culpeper were tried and executed first. Derham was hung, drawn, and quartered as a traitor. Culpeper, because of his noble birth, was merely beheaded. Then it was Catherine's turn. On February 13th, 1542, she was taken from Sion House to the Tower of London by barge. Legend says she spent the night before her execution practicing laying her head on the block, wanting to meet death with dignity. She was about 19 years old. The next morning, February 13th, 1542, Catherine Howard and her lady-in-waiting Jane Boleyn, Anne Boleyn's sister-in-law, who had allegedly helped arrange the meetings with Culpeper, were both executed on Tower Green. Catherine's last words are disputed. Some sources say she asked for mercy, while others claim she confessed to deserving death. The most poignant account says she simply asked to be remembered in people's prayers. Henry never spoke of her again. He had loved her, or at least loved what she represented to him: youth, beauty, vitality. But in the end, like with all his wives, she was disposable. Catherine Howard's story is perhaps the saddest of all Henry's wives. She wasn't politically ambitious like Anne Boleyn. She wasn't a foreign princess like Catherine of Aragon or Anne of Cleves. She was just a young girl from a noble family, used by her relatives, married to a monster, and executed before she was 20. 2 wives executed now, and Henry had one more marriage left in him. This time, it would be different. Catherine Parr, the one who looked after Henry during his final years. By 1543, Henry was 52 years old and falling apart. The ulcer on his leg had become so infected that some days he couldn't walk. He was massively obese. His armor from this period shows a waist circumference of over 50 inches. He was in constant pain, often bedridden, and his temperament had become increasingly paranoid and violent. He needed a nurse more than a wife, and that's exactly what he got. Catherine Parr was 31 when Henry chose her, older than any of his previous brides except Catherine of Aragon. She was educated, intelligent, and already twice widowed. She'd been married at 17 to an elderly man who died, then married again to a man she actually loved, Lord Latimer, who had also recently died. When Henry's attention turned to her, Catherine was in love with someone else, Thomas Seymour, the brother of Jane Seymour and uncle to Prince Edward. They'd been courting. Marriage seemed likely. Then the king intervened. Catherine couldn't refuse. But unlike his previous wives, Catherine approached the marriage with clear eyes. She knew what had happened to Catherine Howard and Anne Boleyn. She knew the king was dangerous, unpredictable, and capable of turning on anyone. So she made herself indispensable, not as a romantic partner, but as a companion, a nurse, and a stepmother to his children. They married on July 12, 1543, at Hampton Court Palace. It was a small, quiet ceremony, no grand celebrations. Henry was in too much pain, and everyone knew this marriage was practical rather than passionate. Catherine threw herself into her role. She tended to Henry's terrible leg wound, which stank and oozed constantly. She managed his household. She read to him, discussed theology with him, and kept him company through his darkest moods. Most importantly, she reconciled Henry with his daughters. Mary and Elizabeth had both been declared illegitimate and excluded from court. Catherine persuaded Henry to bring them back, to restore them to the succession, to treat them as his children again. The Act of Succession of 1544 put them back in line for the throne after Edward, a decision that would ultimately shape England's future. But Catherine's intelligence and education nearly became her downfall. She was a committed Protestant reformer. She published religious writings, becoming the first Queen of England to publish a book under her own name. At first, Henry enjoyed these intellectual conversations, but as his health declined and his paranoia increased, Catherine's religious views became dangerous. Conservative factions at court, led by Stephen Gardiner, Bishop of Winchester, saw an opportunity to bring down another queen. In 1546, they drew up articles against Catherine for heresy. A warrant was issued for her arrest. If she'd been questioned and charged, she would almost certainly have been found guilty, and the penalty for heresy was burning at the stake. But Catherine found out about the plot just in time. She went to Henry and played the role perfectly. She was humble, submissive, tearful. She told him she only debated theology to distract him from his pain, to learn from his superior wisdom. She said she, a mere woman, could never presume to instruct her husband and lord. Henry was mollified. When the guards came to arrest her the next day, Henry sent them away, calling them fools and beasts. Catherine had talked her way out of execution. For the last year of Henry's life, Catherine continued to care for him. By the end, he was barely mobile, hoisted by machinery, his leg infection so severe that servants could smell him from rooms away. He died on January 28, 1547, at 55 years old. Catherine Parr was free. Within months, she married the man she'd loved all along, Thomas Seymour. She was finally able to marry for love. she became pregnant for the first time at 36. On August 30th, 1548, she gave birth to a daughter. But like Jane Seymour before her, Catherine tragically developed childbed fever. She died on September 5th, 1548, just 6 days after giving birth. She was 36 years old. Of all Henry's wives, Catherine Parr had perhaps the most remarkable impact. She published books. She influenced religious reform. She saved Henry's daughters and restored them to the succession, ensuring that both Mary and Elizabeth would eventually become queens. Henry VIII had married 6 times. He had executed 2 wives, divorced 2, and lost 1 to childbirth. Only Catherine Parr survived him. Henry VIII died believing his legacy was secure. He had his son, Edward. He had broken England free from Rome. He had transformed the monarchy into an absolute power that answered to no one, not the Pope, not the nobility, not even God's law as he saw it. But history had other plans. Edward VI, the son Henry sacrificed everything to produce, died at 15 without heirs. Then came Mary, Catherine of Aragon's daughter, the one Henry had declared illegitimate and separated from her mother. She became Mary I, ruling for 5 bloody years, attempting to reverse her father's Protestant Reformation and restore England to Catholicism. And finally, Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter, the disappointment, the illegitimate princess Henry had ignored. She became Elizabeth I and reigned for 45 glorious years. She defeated the Spanish Armada. She presided over England's golden age. She made England a world power. She never married, never had children, and proved that a woman could rule as well as, or better than, any king. The irony is perfect. The daughter Henry valued least became his greatest achievement. His legacy wasn't the son he wanted, it was the daughters he dismissed. If you enjoyed this journey through the tumultuous reign of Henry VIII and want to explore more of England's fascinating royal history, check out our comprehensive video covering every monarch of England, from the Anglo-Saxons to the modern day.